I had the true privilege of being able to call Paul Laffoley a friend of mine. I could call him on the phone at almost any hour of the day, and we'd end up in long, detailed conversations about a myriad of things, all kinds of ideas, a shared curiosity about strange connections and time, and the kinds of questions that don't really end, and I really miss that. I miss Paul. Right near Paul's building, there was a restaurant that he loved that had his favorite dessert, and it was called Cherry's Jubilee. And we got some, and we decided to do a little before and after. This is after lunch. We got a real dessert, and he ate that thing with such glee. You can see how happy he is afterwards here. Here's Paul at his work desk. We're reading a book, and I can't quite make out what it is. It might have been T.S. Eliot, but I'm not sure from the picture. I can't get close enough. Here I am at his desk. You can see the models of time machines and various things right there. Here's Paul with his lion's foot, and I'll tell this story here because this is as best I remember it from him, and I listened really intently because this was fascinating. Paul always wanted a lion's foot. He was a Leo and identified with it, and always had this idea that he wanted to have a lion's foot. That's the best he could explain it to me. And he was setting up an installation of his art in an art gallery, and he was sleeping up a ladder on kind of a shelf, as I understood it, in the gallery. So, and this again is to the best of my recollection, so if there's a better version of this story out there, I'd love to know it. So he climbs this ladder to lay on this ledge to go to sleep. And I think sometime in the middle of the night or sometime, he falls off this ledge, and it's quite high. And as he's going down, he's thinking he wants to protect his head and his hands from injury when they hit the concrete floor. So he went feet first and drove his feet into his ankles and shattered his ankles, as I understand, and had massive damage to both legs and both feet and ankles, to the point where one of the legs became infected and he had to have his foot amputated. And he told me in all seriousness, and I utterly believe him, that the doctor came in and told him that he was going to have his foot removed. And he said the very first thought in his mind was, this is great, now I can get a lion's foot. And I believe him. And so he contacted a Hollywood makeup person, a top-rate Hollywood makeup person, and they designed this prosthetic foot that he would wear. And so here he is at Disinfo conference in, I want to say, Rhinebeck Valley of New York, Omega Institute. And here he is with his lion's foot because he's going to speak in public. Paul sitting next to Howard Bloom, who's quite animated in discussing something at Omega Institute. There was a 6 or 7 month period when about once a month, and this would have been circa 2005, 2006, I'd take the bus down from Maine to Boston to see him. I'd walk through that strange mall and wind around streets and turn the corner onto Boylston Street, and it was as if the atmosphere had changed. On the mailbox, it said Boston Visionary Cell, and you buzzed up and you walked into Paul's amazing workshop. The room felt a bit like a living mind. Tools and books and inventions and drawings and paintings in various stages of completion, and scaled down models of inventions. And you really had the sense when you were with him of someone who was 100% dedicated to what they were interested in and what they were pursuing in their vision. Paul could be quite laser focused and so intentional. And I learned a lot from him. We had a lot of many long discussions that at the time I had on a small format video camera, and I don't have that camera anymore, nor do I have the tapes, but sometimes when you spend time with someone that has an effect on you, the effects can linger despite not remembering precisely what was said even. Here is an image of a painting of Paul's that he was working on in the time that I was visiting him. It's called Pistis Sophia, and part of what's written on the canvas in those little stick-on letters that he used, it says, "Believe in the wisdom of Sagittarius the archer." Now you'll notice in this picture, he hasn't yet drawn in her eyes, and there's details that aren't there. So this is a work in progress, and then here's an image of the completed painting. One detail that's always stayed with me is Paul told me he never saw people in his dreams. And if he did see people in his dreams, they were stick figures, and everything was two-dimensional and diagrammatic, a bit like his art is. And it's fascinating because dimensionality was such a core theme in both his work and what we spent so much time talking about. Here's another something I'll never forget about the way that we talked. I used to bring larger index cards, about 5 by 8, and Paul would take one of these cards and diagram an idea on it. And it wouldn't be with words, but more like circles and mandalas and relationships and geometries and lines. And we'd sit there and discuss what we were talking about while looking at this diagram. And he'd be going into detail until we felt we were both seeing the same thing and could move on. And a new topic would come up, and Paul would want a diagram again, but he wouldn't take a new card. He would draw right on top of what he'd already drawn. And this would happen over and over. And in the moment, it never felt like scribbles. It felt very precise. And the newest layer was completely clear because the card at that point wasn't a record. It was more like a living instrument. It was a workspace for our attention to be shared. And looking back, those cards were almost unreadable in the years that I had them, and I would take them out of a book that I had of his where I had them stowed away, and it was just scribbles. It looked more like Jackson Pollock. But it's part of what intrigues me about it is it's a little bit of an analogy for hyperdimensionality, multiple versions of this conversation occupying the same surface, and the old layers are still there, but the present layer is becoming the one you inhabit and are in reference to. Finally, here's Paul's painting Thanaton III, which he designed to be conscious and alive and able to serve as an interacting membrane between dimensions and between beings. So you'll see there's little handprints in the middle with 5 fingers for humans and then little 3-fingered prints for some kind of an alien life that would be on the other side of the dimensional membrane, putting their little hands up, and you would receive information. The swirl in the middle is Paul's Laffoley, which is his conception of what would work as a viable time machine where you would dilate time asynchronously, and all of these time dilations would build up. So I miss Paul a great deal. I hope these pictures and these words can give you some incentive to seek out his work and look up interviews and find videos on YouTube and spend some time with his paintings. He's one of a kind. He was absolutely one of a kind. And thank you, Paul Laffoley, for being there.